Sure, you could use a real tree branch for scatter terrain, but where's the fun in that?
Welcome to another scatter terrain tutorial here at the GameSmith. I sure appreciate all of you taking the time to visit us while we show you how to build fallen log scatter terrain. The basic building block that we're going to be using for this build is aluminum foil, or tin foil, or aluminium for our cousins across the pond. An exact measurement isn't needed. 20 to 30 centimeters or 10 to 12 inches is a good size to start with. We begin by folding our foil over on itself lengthways and then flatten it out. We then fold it in half again across its width and then fold it over again. Now we add a PVA water paste to our build, about 80% PVA and 20% water, and we want to coat half the foil surface with it. Oops, I should have folded over my non-folded edge first. Then we fold the unglued foil onto the glued foil and press it down and smooth out the surface. Don't worry about the glue squeezing out the ends, it's just a bit of a mess. Next we take a skewer or any thin stick, and starting at the open edge, we wrap the foil around the skewer, pulling it as tightly as possible around it. Then with our trusty glue gun, we put a thin layer of hot glue on the bottom and roll the foil over itself. Again, you want this to be as tight as possible, but be careful that you don't burn yourself on the hot glue. Once you have the process started, just repeat it until you've finished the foil roll. I like to use different sizes of dowels in order to create a variety of log sizes for use at my table. When we reach the final edge, you want to make sure that the foil is well secured together so that the layers don't separate later on. I see that I need to add a bit more hot glue to secure this edge. I need a tool to create streaks in the foil. I like to use tweezers for this because of the two sharp points at the end. Any tool will do, but you don't want to cut the foil. You only want to create long grooves on the surface. You don't want to cut or gouge the foil. The goal here is to create a wood-like texture, so you want to crisscross your grooves and make the surface more bark-like. Now the end result of our scratching the surface will be compounded by our PVA glue on the inside of our log contracting. As the water in the PVA evaporates, which will take a few hours, the glue will contract and pull the foil together into patterns made by our tool markings. If you've used too much hot glue to hold the build together, you'll reduce the shrinking effect on the foil. I'd like to be able to tell you exactly how much hot glue to use before you spoil this contraction effect, but I can't because I worked through it with trial and error. I guess the easiest instruction then would be to use as little hot glue as possible. Next, make sure you leave the log to dry for a few hours. However, I'm going to move right along and slide the skewer down just a little bit so that I can cut the end off the foil log. Don't remove the dowel or skewer yet, just slide it down a little bit. We want to round the end of our log and compress the layers a little bit. I'll just tap the end a few times to blunt the edge. Now we take the end that we removed and we squeeze it into a round shape. This works much better when the glue is actually dried. I want to cut the foil roll at a small angle so I can attach it to the larger roll as a kind of stump. I'm going to use my tweezers here to hold the small piece so I don't burn my big clumsy hands with the hot glue. Next we choose a random location on our log and add the branch and make sure it's secure. I want to add a few dabs of hot glue at the joint, but not too much. We want to preserve as much of our texture as possible. Then, while the glue is still a little malleable, because the foil will hold the heat for a short time, I can use my tweezers to drag some texture into the hot glue as it hardens. Then I'll squeeze the stump into a shape that I'm happy with. Next, I want to remove some more of the skewer from my foil log without removing it entirely. Then I'll cut the end without the skewer into 2 halves. About 5 centimeters or 2 inches will do just fine. Then you'll want to twist the 2 halves so that the foil layers don't fray or split. You're likely to have some of the foil break or flake off, but don't worry about it. So both branches aren't the same length. I'll cut one in half, but I'll cut it at an angle. By cutting this at an angle, our rolled foil has revealed to show the tree rings of our log. I think I'll bend this other branch into a more twisted shape. Next, I'll remove the skewer entirely so I can add some shape to the rest of our foil log. The reason we've kept our skewer or dowel inside our build up to this point is so that we don't compress the log or ruin its shape while we're working with it. Now the goal here is to create an organic tree-like shape by bending, twisting, and compressing our foil log. I'll add a bit more hot glue to reinforce this joint. I don't want the log to fall apart at the table. I'll also add some hot glue to the other joints at the branches so that they stay together as well. You can create different sized logs, different lengths and widths, different branches and so on with this technique. You can even glue different foil logs together in order to create more elaborate shapes. Next, I have another log that I made with a larger dowel, and I'm going to add a tree hollow in the side. You can easily accomplish this by using a pair of sharp scissors to cut into the foil log. Then, using a tool like tweezers, you can shape the hollow to look more natural. I'll then bend this log a bit in order to give the shape a little more character. We also want to cut the end off of some of our logs in order to reveal the layers of foil that look like tree rings. We could add some more stumps to the logs, tiny branches, or just simply leave it as it is. As you can see, I've made several different logs, but I've noticed here that I've made this tree hollow a bit large, so I'm concerned that the log might break at the table. As a result, I'm going to reinforce the hollow with some hot glue to make sure that the log will survive abuse. I don't need a lot of hot glue, and I don't want to ruin the texture of the foil. Next, I want to share these tree armatures from Woodland Scenics with you, who, by the way, are absolutely not sponsoring this video. There are 12 5 to 7 inch armatures in this bag, and they work great if you don't want to build your own trees. I'm going to use some branches from this product in order to add them to the foil logs. I'm doing this rather than making my own branches from foil in order to save time. The most obvious use of these branches is to put them at the ends of our stumps, but the tapering of the branches looks awkward. Even though we're going to paint this, the differing shapes between the two would be very obvious. I'm sure anyone who's seen a badly made fake tree will understand this. To add the branches, you can just put a hole in the foil log and slide the plastic branch inside. Then we can use some hot glue to hold the branch in place. Then, while the glue is still warm, we can use a tool like this hobby knife in order to add texture to the surface. Make sure that the texture matches the grain of the foil log in order to blend the glue into the build. Making markings that are against the grain will look awkward when the log is painted. Don't forget to glue the top joint where the branch and the foil log meet. When terrain pieces are picked up at the table, it's usually done by grabbing the feature that sticks out the most, so you want to make sure those features are very secure. Our next step is to reinforce and paint our foil logs with a mixture of 30/70 Mod Podge and black paint. The reason you want this mixture to be more fluid is so that it flows down into the cracks and in between the textures. You don't want any silver foil showing through in order to spoil the illusion of your build. Now I'm using black paint instead of brown because of how I'm choosing to paint the logs. However, you should absolutely use whatever color palette you want for your own build. You'll only need a thin layer to reinforce and camouflage the tinfoil. You may want to add another coat in the see-through areas after the first layer is dry. The next step is to add our brown layers. We want to use 2 different tones of brown, one dark and one light. Now here is where art and reality diverge. Red oak, brasswood, black cherry, black walnut, and Manitoba maple all have gray bark. I'm not trying to create an exhaustive list here, I'm just trying to point out that if you're painting for realism, you don't exactly want to be using this palette. We'll start with the dark brown, which is made much darker by our black base coat. If you'd like to know more about base coats, please check out my foundations video on undercoats and priming. I'll put a link in the top right corner. We just want to use our brush in order to dab the dark brown over our surface without getting complete coverage. I want some of the black of my base coat to show through. After the dark brown layer is dry, we'll repeat the process with the lighter tone of brown. Again, I want to have a blotchy or dabbed appearance to allow the other colors underneath to show through. On to the dry brushing. For that, we're going to use a simple tan in order to highlight our bark features. As with any dry brush, we need only a little paint on our palette. We need a wide, flat brush. I want a brush with a pointed toe on its edge. We load the brush with very little paint and remove the excess on our napkin so that very little paint is left in the bristles. Then we drag our brush lightly over the textured surface of our foil log. It's better to do multiple passes of very light layers rather than risking splotches from a loaded brush. Make sure while dry brushing that you're brushing across the grain, not with the grain. It's important to preserve the original colors beneath the raised features that are being highlighted. It's not necessary that you have a uniform or consistent dry brush layer across the entire build. Some areas can be brighter and others darker. I hope you can see all the tiny rings on the ends of our build that improve the illusion of our foil logs. This is when the illusion of our foil logs is fully realized and they take on a bark-like appearance. Don't forget to dry brush the joints where the branches join each other. Now, when it comes to the hollow, I recommend that you don't highlight the interior at all. If we leave the hollow black, it will preserve the illusion of a dark interior of our log, no matter how it lies on the table. Now I'll just dry brush a few extra spots on our log, and we'll move on. These are all the logs that I made for this build. Now, in order to conclude my build, I sprayed a matte varnish on some of the logs in order to seal in the paint. Some of the logs are a little shiny, and others I left alone so they'd have a dull appearance. And with that final note, these fallen logs are ready for the table. So that's how I created fallen log scattered terrain with aluminum foil. With a different paint palette and the techniques shown here, you could create all types of fallen trees, timber at a fallen camp, burned fallen trees, or even some type of wood golem. I hope your imagination engine has been stoked by today's video, and you can see all the possibilities that emerge from these simple techniques. If you're already subscribed, make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss a future GameSmith video. I'm also curious how other people in the tabletop crafting community have made fallen logs scattered terrain for their table. I'd like to hear from you in the comment section down below. In our next video, we're gonna supersize our fallen logs. Until next time, I'll see you at the table.